He hadn't looked his daughter in the eyes in over 3 years. Not because he didn't love her, but because the doctors told him she couldn't see him anyway. Charles Davies was a billionaire. He owned towers, companies, and enough wealth to buy anything in this world. Except the one thing that mattered. His 5-year-old daughter Diana was blind, or so every specialist confirmed. She never followed lights, never reached for colors, never looked back when he called her name. So he did what broken fathers do, threw money at the pain and stayed far away. For 3 years, he believed she'd never see his face. Until one afternoon, he walked in and saw something that shattered everything. There are moments in life when the ground beneath you just disappears. Charles Davies had one of those moments on a Tuesday in March. He was standing in the doorway of his own home, watching a housekeeper kneel in front of his daughter with a flashlight in her hand. The woman's name was Irene Baker. She'd only been working in his apartment for 6 weeks, came from Detroit with nothing but a bus ticket and a dying mother's last wish, get your family out. She took the job because $28 an hour was more money than she'd ever seen. She scrubbed his floors, stayed quiet, sent every spare dollar home to her 3 younger siblings. But Irene had something money couldn't buy. Eyes that refused to stop seeing. From the moment she stepped into that apartment, something didn't add up about Diana. This little girl in designer clothes, living in the most beautiful home Irene had ever seen. Everyone said she was blind. The father believed it. The doctors confirmed it. The caregivers worked around it. But Irene watched. And what she saw broke her heart and lit a fire in her chest at the same time. Diana's head turned towards sunlight before it touched her skin. Her fingers hovered over the yellow block like she'd seen it first. Her eyes followed Irene across the room when she wore red. Small things, quiet things, things a blind child shouldn't be able to do. Irene's heart started whispering a truth. Her mind was terrified to speak. This baby can see. She didn't tell anyone at first. Who was she to question specialists? If she was wrong, she'd lose everything, her job, her family's only way out. But if she was right, a little girl was living in a darkness that didn't have to exist. So Irene tested. She dropped spoons and watched Diana's eyes move before they hit the floor, placed her teddy bear in different corners and watched her walk straight to it. And then, with her hands still in yellow cleaning gloves and her pulse pounding in her ears, Irene made a choice. She knelt down in front of Diana, pulled out a small flashlight, clicked it on, and watched this little girl's pupils respond to the light. It was small, subtle, but it was there. That's when she heard the footsteps. Charles stood frozen, watching. His phone slipped from his hand and hit the floor, because his daughter, his blind daughter, was staring at the light. And then Diana reached her tiny hand toward it, looked right at the glow, and whispered one word that destroyed 3 years of medical truth. Bright. Charles fell to his knees. Everything he believed shattered by a housekeeper who refused to look away, and a little girl who'd been seeing all along. Before we begin, click subscribe, hit like, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I believe this story found you for a reason. Maybe it's time to see what you've been missing. Nobody moved. The apartment was so quiet you could hear the traffic 15 floors below. Charles was still on his knees, staring at his daughter like he was seeing her for the first time in his life. Diana held the flashlight now, turning it in her small hands, watching the beam dance across the ceiling. Irene stood slowly, her yellow gloves still on, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her chest. "Mr. Davies," she whispered, "I need to tell you something." Charles couldn't speak, couldn't move, just kept staring at Diana's face, at her eyes that were supposed to be blind, tracking the light like it was the most natural thing in the world. Irene's voice was steady, even though her hands were shaking. "I've been watching her for weeks now, and sir, I don't think she's blind." The words hung in the air like smoke. Charles finally looked up at her. His face was pale, his eyes red. "That's not possible," he said, his voice cracked. "3 doctors, Boston Children's Hospital. They ran tests. They showed me the scans." "I know," Irene said quietly, "but I've seen things, small things, things nobody else was looking for." She told him everything. How Diana's head turned toward the windows when the sun came through. How her fingers hovered over the bright yellow blocks before she picked them up. How her eyes followed movement. Irene's red sweater, the flowers on the coffee table, the light across the floor. "At first I thought I was imagining it," Irene said. "I almost didn't say anything. Because who am I, right? Just the housekeeper. What do I know? Charles was listening now, really listening. But then I couldn't stop seeing it, Irene continued. Every day, there was something new, something that didn't match what I'd been told about her. So, I tested it. Quiet tests, things she wouldn't notice. She told him about the spoon that dropped and how Diana's eyes moved before it hit the floor, about the teddy bear she'd placed in different spots and how Diana walked straight to it every time without searching. And today, Irene's voice softened, today I used the flashlight, just to see, and her pupils responded, Mr. Davies. They got smaller when I shined the light. Charles looked back at Diana. She was sitting on the floor now, still holding the flashlight, humming softly to herself. He thought about the day she was diagnosed, 18 months old, sitting in her mother's lap while the doctor shined lights in her face, waved toys in front of her. She never responded, never reached, never looked. Your daughter can't see, Mr. Davies. I'm sorry. He'd written the check, scheduled follow-ups with 2 more specialists. They all said the same thing, so he'd built this whole life around it. Braille books she'd never read, a bedroom redesigned so she could navigate in the dark, caregivers who knew how to work with blind children. He threw money at the problem because money was the only language he knew, but he never got close, never held her for long, never looked her in the eyes because he thought she couldn't look back. The guilt was too heavy. Singapore, that merger. He wasn't there when she was born, missed the first 4 days of her life, wasn't there when his ex-wife first started noticing the signs. By the time he flew home, it was already over. The marriage ended 6 months after the diagnosis. His ex-wife moved to Zurich, sent Christmas cards with no return address, and Charles buried himself in work, stayed at the office until midnight, took calls from London at 2 in the morning, filled the apartment with people who knew what to do while he hid behind spreadsheets and board meetings. The apartment grew cold, quiet, functional. Diana wandered these rooms like a ghost. Expensive dresses, perfect hair, toys she'd memorized by touch, living in a world everyone told her was dark, and he'd believed it, accepted it, let it become the truth. Until now, Charles looked up at Irene, this woman he barely knew, this housekeeper from Detroit who made $28 an hour and had seen what an army of specialists missed. What do I do? He whispered. His voice sounded broken, small. Irene knelt down beside him. You get her to a new doctor, she said gently, not the ones who saw her before. Someone fresh, someone who'll actually look. Charles nodded. His hands were shaking. Diana crawled over to him, the flashlight still glowing in her hand. She touched his face, felt the wetness on his cheeks. Daddy crying? She asked. Her voice was so small, so innocent. Charles pulled her close, buried his face in her hair, and cried harder than he had in years, because for the first time in 3 years, he let himself hope. And hope, he was learning, was the most terrifying thing in the world. That night, Irene couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed in Queens, staring at the ceiling of the room she shared with 2 other women. The streetlight outside cast shadows across the cracked plaster. Someone's TV played through the thin walls. Her phone sat on the nightstand. She'd almost called her mom 4 times. Mama, I think I just changed a little girl's life today. Mama, I think I might have just lost my job. She didn't know which one was true yet. When Irene left the apartment that evening, Charles had still been on the floor with Diana. He'd looked up at her with red eyes and said 2 words, thank you. But Irene knew how these things worked. Rich people said thank you. Then they called their lawyers, started asking questions. How long have you been watching my daughter? Why didn't you say something sooner? What gives you the right? She'd grown up watching her mother get fired from jobs for speaking up, for pointing out when something wasn't right, for asking questions nobody wanted to hear. Keep your head down, baby, her mom used to say. We can't afford to make waves. But Irene had never been good at staying quiet. She thought about the day she first met Diana, 6 weeks ago. The little girl had been sitting in the playroom, running her fingers over a puzzle she'd done 100 times before, not looking at it, just feeling. Something in Irene's chest had cracked open watching that. She'd grown up taking care of people, her younger brothers and sister back in Detroit, her mum when the cancer got bad. She knew what it looked like when someone needed help, but didn't know how to ask for it. Diana didn't ask. She couldn't. She was 5 years old, and living in a story everyone else had written for her. Irene had 3 younger siblings depending on the money she sent home every month. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Her mum's medication cost $400 she didn't have saved up yet. One phone call from Charles Davies could destroy everything. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was Diana's face turning toward that flashlight, the way her pupils had responded. The whisper, bright. That little girl had been trapped for 3 years in a darkness she didn't belong in, and Irene was the only one who'd seen it. Her phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. Her heart stopped. She opened it. This is Charles Davies. I have an appointment at NYU Langone tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'd like you to come with us, if you're willing. Irene read it 3 times. She thought about her mom, her siblings, the rent, the medication, everything that could go wrong. Then she thought about Diana reaching for the light. She typed back, I'll be there. She hit send before fear could change her mind. Because some things mattered more than safety. Some truths were worth the risk. And maybe, just maybe, God had put her in that apartment for exactly this reason. To see what no one else could. To speak when staying silent would have been easier. To be the voice for a little girl who'd been living in silence for far too long. Irene turned off her phone and finally closed her eyes. Tomorrow, everything would change. She just didn't know if it would break her or save her. But she was about to find out. The waiting room at NYU Langone smelled like antiseptic and fear. Charles sat with his hands folded, knees bouncing. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, just kept replaying that moment over and over. Diana, reaching for the light, whispering, bright. Irene sat 2 seats away, still in her work uniform. She'd taken the subway straight from another cleaning job in the Bronx. Her hands were raw from scrubbing someone else's bathtub all morning. She didn't belong here. Not in this gleaming hospital with its marble counters and doctors in pressed white coats. Not sitting next to a billionaire waiting to hear if his daughter could see. But Charles had asked her to come. You saw what I missed, he'd said on the phone that morning. I need you here. Diana sat between them, swinging her legs, humming a song Irene had taught her last week. She had no idea today might change everything. Diana Davies. A nurse stood in the doorway. Kind eyes. Soft voice. Charles stood too quickly, nearly knocked over his coffee. Irene followed, her heart pounding. They were led down a hallway into an examination room. Bigger than the ones Irene remembered from the free clinic back in Detroit. Everything here looked expensive, clean, like hope had a price tag. Dr. Sarah Chen walked in 5 minutes later. She was younger than Irene expected. Warm smile. No condescension in her eyes when she shook Irene's hand. You're the one who noticed, Dr. Chen said quietly. Irene nodded. Couldn't speak. That took courage. The examination started gently. Dr. Chen knelt down to Diana's level, showed her colorful cards, moving lights, patterns that shifted and changed. Charles stood by the window, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight. Irene could see him holding his breath every time Diana responded. And she did respond. Her eyes tracked the red card, lingered on the yellow one, followed the light as Dr. Chen moved it slowly across her field of vision. Small movements, subtle, but there. Dr. Chen's face stayed neutral, but Irene caught something in her eyes. Recognition. Understanding. Mr. Davies, Dr. Chen said quietly, I'd like to run some additional tests. An MRI, visual processing assessments. It's going to take a couple of days. What do you see? Charles's voice cracked. Dr. Chen looked at Diana, then back at him. I see a little girl who's been trying to tell you something for a very long time. The room went still. The original diagnosis, Dr. Chen continued carefully. I don't think it was complete. Charles gripped the edge of the examination table. What does that mean? It means we need to look deeper. There's something happening here that wasn't caught before. She paused, chose her words carefully. Your daughter isn't blind, Mr. Davies, but her brain is processing sight differently than most children. I need more time to understand exactly what we're working with. Irene's knees went weak. She sat down hard in the plastic chair. She'd been right. 3 years. 3 years of darkness that didn't have to exist. Charles turned away, faced the window. His shoulders shook. Doctor, Chen rested a gentle hand on his arm. We'll figure this out, together. But I need you to understand whatever we find, there's treatment, there's therapy, there's hope. Hope, that word again. Diana tugged on Irene's sleeve. Miss Irene, Why is Daddy sad again? Irene pulled her close. He's not sad, baby. He's just feeling a lot right now. Dr. Chen scheduled the tests for the next morning, early, before the hospital got busy. As they walked out, Charles stopped in the hallway. Irene, she turned. His eyes were red, his voice barely a whisper. If you hadn't spoken up, he couldn't finish. Irene shook her head. I almost didn't, but you did. The weight of that truth settled between them. Outside, the city noise rushed back in. Car horns, sirens, people rushing past who had no idea the world had just shifted for a little girl and her father. Irene's phone buzzed, her mum calling from Detroit. She let it go to voicemail, because right now, she needed to stay here, with this family that wasn't hers. In this moment, that changed everything, waiting to see what tomorrow's tests would finally reveal. Charles sat alone in his office that night, staring at a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. The apartment was quiet. Diana was asleep. The caregiver had gone home hours ago. He kept thinking about tomorrow. The MRI, the tests, Dr. Chen's careful words, your daughter isn't blind. But was eating him alive. What if they'd caught it earlier? What if he'd been paying attention instead of hiding behind work? What if he'd held her more, looked at her more, been present instead of drowning in guilt? 3 years. He'd missed 3 years. His phone lit up on the desk. A text from his assistant. Board meeting rescheduled to Friday. You're clear tomorrow. Charles didn't respond. For the first time in his career, work felt like the smallest thing in the world. He thought about Irene. The way she'd stood in that examination room today in her cleaning uniform, hands folded, watching Diana like she was her own child. This woman who scrubbed his floors for $28 an hour had seen what he'd been too afraid to look for. The shame of that burned. Across town, Irene sat on the fire escape outside her building, phone pressed to her ear. Mama, I can't explain it all right now, she said quietly, but I think something good is happening. Her mother's voice crackled through the line. Tired, worried. Baby, you sound scared. I am scared, Irene admitted. What if I'm wrong? What if the tests come back and... You're not wrong. Her mother's voice was firm. You've always seen things other people miss, even when you were little. Remember when you knew Mrs. Patterson's son was sick before anybody else did? Irene remembered. She was 9 years old, noticed the boy's eyes looked different, told her mom. 2 weeks later, they found the tumor. God gave you eyes that see, Irene, her mother continued. Don't be afraid of that gift. Irene's throat tightened. I just keep thinking, this little girl, 3 years, Mama. 3 years she's been living like she can't see. And now she has you. The words settled in Irene's chest. She stayed on the fire escape long after the call ended. Watched the lights in the windows across the street. Families eating dinner. Kids doing homework. Normal lives. She wondered what normal would look like for Diana after tomorrow. Back in the apartment, Charles finally walked down the hall to Diana's room. She was asleep, her blue teddy bear tucked under her arm. The nightlight cast soft shadows across her face. He knelt beside her bed, studied her features like he was seeing them for the first time. She had his nose, her mother's cheekbones, eyelashes that rested against her skin like tiny brushes. He'd looked at her 1,000 times but never really seen her. Too afraid, too guilty, too convinced she'd never look back. Charles reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Diana stirred, her eyes opened slowly, and for just a second, one brief, impossible second, he could have sworn she looked right at him. Not through him, not past him, at him. His breath caught. Daddy, she whispered. I'm here, baby. Tomorrow we go to the doctor again. Yeah, but it's okay. Dr. Chen is nice, remember? Diana nodded sleepily. Miss Irene coming too? Yes, she'll be there. Good. Diana's eyes closed again. I like when Miss Irene is there. Charles stayed kneeling by her bed long after she fell back asleep. He thought about tomorrow, about what the tests might reveal, about the years he'd lost and the time he might still have. And he made a promise in the darkness of that room. Whatever tomorrow brought, good news or hard news, he wouldn't run anymore. He wouldn't hide behind money or guilt or fear. He was her father, and it was time to start acting like one, even if it terrified him, especially because it did. 2 days later, they sat in Dr. Chen's office, waiting for the results. Charles hadn't slept in 48 hours. Irene had called in sick to her other jobs. Diana colored in a book on the floor, humming quietly. Dr. Chen walked in holding a folder. Her face was calm, but there was something in her eyes that made Charles's stomach drop. She sat down across from them. "Your daughter isn't blind, Mr. Davies." The words hung in the air. Charles couldn't breathe. "She has a condition called cortical visual impairment, CVI. Dr. Chen opened the folder, showed them images of Diana's brain scans. Her eyes work perfectly. The optic nerves are fine. But the part of her brain that processes what her eyes see, that's where the struggle is. Irene leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "It means her eyes are sending images to her brain, but her brain has trouble making sense of them. It's like, Doctor." Chen paused, searching for the right words. "Imagine getting a text message in a language you don't fully understand yet. The message is there. It's real, but you can't quite read it clearly." Charles's hands were shaking. "So she can see." "Yes, but not the way you or I see. Her vision is inconsistent, some days clearer than others. Bright colors are easier for her brain to process. Movement catches her attention, but details, faces, fine print, those are harder. For 3 years," Charles's voice broke, "for 3 years, we told her she was blind." Dr. Chen's expression softened. The original doctors saw the processing delay and assumed complete blindness. They didn't test for CVI. "It happens more often than you'd think." "Can it be fixed?" Irene asked quietly. "With vision therapy, yes. Her brain can be trained to better process what her eyes see. It takes time, patience, specialized treatment. But children with CVI often show significant improvement." Dr. Chen turned to Charles. "She's been seeing fragments of the world this whole time, Mr. Davies. Colors, light, movement. She just didn't have the tools to understand what she was seeing, or the language to tell you." The weight of that crushed him. All those moments, all those years. Diana had been trying to see him, and he'd been too far away to notice. "When can we start?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Tomorrow, if you'd like." Charles nodded. Couldn't speak. Irene reached over, squeezed his hand once. Quick, gentle. Dr. Chen knelt down in front of Diana. "Hey, sweetheart. How would you like to play some games that help you see even better?" Diana looked up. Her eyes found Dr. Chen's face, not perfectly, not clearly, but enough. "Will Daddy play too?" Dr. Chen smiled. "I think Daddy would love that." Charles wiped his eyes quickly, but Diana saw. "Daddy's crying again," she said softly. This time, Charles didn't hide it. He knelt down beside her, pulled her close. "Yeah, baby, but these are good tears." Diana touched his wet cheek, confused but trusting. "Good tears?" "Yeah. The kind you cry when something broken starts to heal." Irene turned away, her own eyes burning. Because 3 years of darkness were finally ending, and a little girl was about to see her father's face for the very first time. Really see it, not through fog or confusion or fragments, but clearly, the way she was always meant to. 3 weeks into therapy, Diana sat in a room filled with colored cards, light boxes, and patterns designed to teach her brain how to see. Charles came to every session, cancelled meetings, pushed back calls, showed up in jeans and a t-shirt instead of suits. Irene was there too. She'd switched to part-time at her other jobs. Charles had quietly tripled her salary, but she never mentioned it, just showed up every morning, ready to help. The therapist, a woman named Monica, worked with Diana gently, teaching her to focus, to track, to connect what her eyes saw with what her brain understood. Progress was slow. Some days Diana could name colors perfectly. Other days everything looked gray and blurry. But she was trying, and Charles was learning what it meant to be patient. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, something shifted. Monica placed a mirror in front of Diana. "Can you tell me what you see?" Diana stared at her reflection, her face scrunched up in concentration. "Me," she said slowly. "I see. Me. That's right. And what color is your shirt?" "Pink." "Good. Now look beside you. Who's sitting next to you?" Diana turned her head. Charles sat on the floor next to her, holding his breath. She looked at him. Really looked. Her eyes moved across his face, slowly, like she was seeing it for the first time. And maybe she was. The room went quiet. Monica stayed still. Irene stood frozen by the door. Diana's small hand reached out, touched Charles's cheek. "Daddy," she whispered. Her voice sounded different, unsure, like she was asking a question she'd carried for years. Charles's throat closed up. "Yeah, baby. It's me. I can see you." 4 words. That's all it took. Charles broke. Not quietly, not gracefully. He pulled Diana into his arms and sobbed into her hair. 3 years of guilt, of distance, of believing he'd lost her before he ever really had her, all of it came pouring out. Diana wrapped her small arms around his neck, confused but holding on tight. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered. "I see you now." Irene turned away, pressing her hand to her mouth. Her shoulders shook. Monica stepped quietly out of the room, gave them space. Charles held his daughter and cried like a man who'd been holding his breath underwater for 3 years and finally broke the surface. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I stayed away. I'm sorry." "Daddy," Diana pulled back, looked at his face. Her eyes were clearer now, more focused. "You're here now." The simplicity of it destroyed him. She wasn't angry, wasn't hurt. She was just glad he was here. Charles touched her face, looked into her eyes, eyes that were finally looking back. "I'm not going anywhere ever again," he said. "You hear me? I'm staying right here." Diana smiled, and for the first time in her life, she saw her father smile back. Irene watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her face. She'd risked everything to speak up. And this moment, right here, was why. Not the money, not the recognition. This, a father and daughter finding each other in the rubble of 3 lost years. Seeing each other, finally, truly, for the very first time. That night, Charles sat in Diana's room long after she fell asleep. He'd done this before, watched her sleep, kissed her forehead, whispered goodnight. But tonight felt different, because tonight, for the first time, she'd looked at him and known exactly who he was. He thought about the years he'd wasted, the birthdays where he'd stayed late at the office, the bedtime stories he'd let the caregiver read, the mornings he'd left before Diana woke up because facing her felt too hard. He'd told himself it was guilt that kept him away. But sitting here now, he realized it was fear. Fear that she'd never know him. Fear that he'd failed her in a way money couldn't fix. Fear that being close would only make the pain worse. So he'd stayed distant, built walls, kept himself locked in boardrooms and conference calls where nothing was personal and nothing could hurt. And Diana had paid the price. His phone buzzed. A text from Irene. "How is she?" Charles stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "She's good, sleeping. Thank you for today." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "You're a good father, Mr. Davies. You just forgot for a while." His vision blurred. He didn't feel like a good father. Good fathers didn't miss 3 years. Good fathers didn't need housekeepers to tell them their daughters could see. But maybe Irene was right about one thing. He'd forgotten what mattered. Forgotten that showing up was more important than success. Forgotten that his daughter didn't need a billionaire. She just needed her dad. Across town, Irene sat on her bed, staring at her bank account on her phone. The number didn't make sense at first. Then she realized Charles had been paying her, not just for the therapy sessions, but for everything. The hours she'd missed at other jobs, the times she'd stayed late, the days she'd rearranged her whole life to be there for Diana. He'd quietly been taking care of her family while she took care of his daughter. Her mum called. "Baby, there's money in the account," her mother said, voice shaking. "A lot of money. What's going on?" Irene exhaled slowly. "It's from the family I work for, Mama. They're good people. This is enough to cover my treatment for 6 months." Irene closed her eyes. "I know." Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, "What you did for that little girl. God sees that, Irene. He sees it." After they hung up, Irene sat in the silence of her small room. She thought about the day she'd knelt down with that flashlight, how her hands had shaken, how she'd almost talked herself out of it 100 times. One moment of courage had changed everything. Not just for Diana, for all of them. The next morning, Charles didn't go to the office. He made Diana breakfast, scrambled eggs that were slightly burned, toast with too much butter. She didn't care. She sat at the kitchen table, watching him move around, her eyes tracking him everywhere he went. "Daddy, you're wearing blue," she said, pointing at his shirt. "That's right. You can see that?" She nodded, smiling. Blue like the sky. Charles sat down across from her, his chest tight. What else can you see, baby? Diana looked around the kitchen. Her eyes moved slowly, taking it all in. The yellow flowers Miss Irene brought, the white plates, your face. She said it so simply. Your face. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. Charles reached across the table, took her small hand in his. I love you, Diana. I know I haven't said it enough. I know I haven't been here enough. But I love you more than anything in this world. Diana squeezed his hand back. I know, Daddy. I always knew. How? How could she have known when he'd barely been present? But maybe that was the thing about children. They didn't need perfection. They just needed you to try. And for the first time in 3 years, Charles was finally trying. The apartment didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like something was waking up. Like light was coming back into rooms that had been dark for too long. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to build something real. Something that looked less like guilt and more like love. Something that felt like home. 6 months changed everything. Diana's vision wasn't perfect. Dr. Chen reminded them it never would be. Some days were clearer than others. Some details stayed blurry no matter how hard she tried. But she could see. She could see her father's face when he smiled. Could watch cartoons on Saturday mornings. Could point at the trees in Central Park and say, "Look, Daddy Green." So much green. And Charles? He'd become a different man. He worked from home 3 days a week now. Took calls with Diana sitting on the floor beside him, building block towers. Let her interrupt meetings to show him a drawing she'd made. His board members noticed. His assistant noticed. The whole company noticed. But Charles didn't care. For the first time in his life, his daughter mattered more than his empire. One afternoon, he came home early and found Irene and Diana in the living room, painting. Not at a table. On the floor. With washable paints spread everywhere, a newspaper protecting the rug. Diana's hands were covered in blue and yellow. Her dress had paint streaks. She looked happier than he'd ever seen her. "Daddy!" She turned, eyes bright. "Look, I made the sky." She held up a messy painting, streaks of blue with a yellow circle in the corner. Charles knelt down, studied it like it was a masterpiece. "That's beautiful, baby. Miss Irene showed me how to mix the colors. Watch." Diana dipped her brush in blue, then yellow, and smeared them together. "Now it's green, like the park." Charles looked at Irene. She sat cross-legged on the floor in old jeans and a paint-splattered t-shirt, smiling. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. Irene shrugged. She asked if she could paint. I wasn't going to say no. Charles grabbed a brush. "Mind if I join?" Diana gasped. "You're going to paint with us?" "Why not?" For the next hour, the three of them sat on the living room floor, creating terrible, beautiful art. Diana narrated every color choice, every brushstroke, everything she could finally see. Red like Miss Irene's sweater, blue like Daddy's tie, yellow like sunshine. At one point, Diana leaned against Charles, paint-covered hands leaving marks on his white shirt. He didn't move, didn't care, just wrapped his arm around her and kept painting. Later that evening, after Diana went to bed, Charles found Irene cleaning up in the kitchen. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I hired a cleaning service." Irene smiled. "Old habits." Charles leaned against the counter, watching her rinse brushes. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he said. "About your position here." Irene's hands stilled. Her stomach dropped. Here it comes. She'd gotten too comfortable, crossed too many lines. He was going to let her go now that Diana was doing better. "I want to offer you something permanent," Charles continued. "Not as a housekeeper, as Diana's care coordinator. You'd oversee her therapy, her appointments, her education, full benefits, salary that reflects what you're actually worth." Irene turned, stared at him. "Mr. Davies." "Charles, please." "Charles." Her voice shook. "I don't have degrees. I don't have training. You have something better. You see her, really see her. You always have." Irene's eyes filled. "My family. Bring them. There's a 2-bedroom apartment in the building. It's been vacant for months. It's yours if you want it." Irene couldn't speak. "You gave my daughter her life back," Charles said quietly. "Let me give you and your family a real chance. Please." Irene wiped her eyes, nodded. "Okay. Yeah? Yeah." 3 weeks later, Irene's mother and siblings arrived in New York. Diana was at the window when they pulled up, nose pressed to the glass. "Miss Irene's family is here," she announced. Charles watched from behind her as Irene ran out to meet them, watched her hug her mum, lift her little sister, hold her brothers tight, watched a woman who'd given everything finally get something back. Diana tugged his hand. "Daddy, can we go say hi?" Charles looked down at his daughter, her eyes bright, her smile real. "Yeah, baby, let's go." They rode the elevator down together, hand in hand. And when they stepped outside, Diana saw Irene's family and ran straight to them. "I'm Diana. Miss Irene helps me see." Irene's mother knelt down, tears in her eyes, and pulled Diana into a hug. Charles stood back, watching. Two families that shouldn't have fit together, now intertwined in ways money never could have bought. The apartment on Park Avenue wasn't just his anymore. It was becoming something bigger, something real. A home where broken things were learning to heal, where a father was learning to see, and where a little girl's world was opening up one color at a time. 1 year later, the apartment on Park Avenue felt different now. Where silence used to live, there was laughter. Where coldness settled, warmth filled every corner. Charles sat on the living room floor in an untucked shirt and rolled-up sleeves, building block towers with Diana before his 10 o'clock call. "Higher, Daddy. Make it touch the ceiling." Her vision still wasn't perfect. Dr. Chen said it never would be. Some days were clearer than others. Some things stayed fuzzy around the edges. But Diana could see his face when he laughed, could pick out her own clothes because she loved pink and purple together, even though they clashed, could watch the sunrise through those floor-to-ceiling windows and name every color spreading across the sky. "Orange, Daddy, and pink, and a little bit of gold." Charles kissed the top of her head. "You're right, baby. That's exactly what it is." Irene arrived with her mum, here to take Diana to the park. Mrs. Baker had become like a grandmother to Diana, treating her with the same fierce love she showed her own grandkids. Diana ran to hug them both, then stopped. "Miss Irene, where are your gloves?" Irene smiled. She'd kept those yellow cleaning gloves in a frame in Diana's room. A reminder of the day everything changed. "Don't need them today, sweetheart. We're just going to the park." "Can we bring them anyway?" "I like looking at them." Irene's eyes met Charles's across the room. He nodded, understanding. Those gloves represented more than a moment. They represented courage. The choice to speak when staying silent would have been easier. The decision to see what everyone else missed. After they left, Charles stood at the window, watching them cross the street toward Central Park. 3 women and a little girl who could finally see the world she'd been living in all along. He thought about the man he used to be. The one who measured worth in deals closed and buildings owned. The one who stayed late at the office because facing his daughter felt too hard. That man was gone. He'd been replaced by someone who understood that being present was worth more than any fortune he could ever build. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. "Board meeting in 20 minutes. Charles looked at the blocks scattered across the floor, at Diana's painting taped to the wall, messy and bright and perfect, at the life he'd almost missed. He typed back, "Reschedule. I'm with my daughter." He sat back down on the floor and waited. 20 minutes later, Diana burst through the door, cheeks flushed from running. "Daddy, I saw a yellow bird." "A real one." Charles scooped her up, held her close. "Tell me everything." And she did. Every detail, every color, every moment of wonder. And Charles listened like it was the most important conversation he'd ever had. Because it was. Later that evening, as he tucked Diana into bed, she looked up at him with those eyes that had learned to see. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, baby. More than you'll ever know." "I know," she whispered. "I can see it." Charles's throat tightened. She didn't just mean with her eyes. She meant with her heart. The apartment overlooking Central Park wasn't a monument to wealth anymore. It was a home, where a daughter learned to see, and a father learned that the greatest gift he could ever give wasn't bought with money. It was simply showing up, being there, seeing her, and letting himself be seen in return. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that the smallest acts of courage can change everything, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Elevated Heart Stories for more stories that remind us we're never too far gone to find our way home. And before you go, leave a comment below. Tell me what this story meant to you, or share a moment when someone saw you when no one else did. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Because sometimes we all need to be reminded that healing is possible, that grace still finds us, and that maybe, just maybe, the story that brought you here found you for a reason.